The New York Giants landed their starting center of the future in John Michael Schmitz out of Minnesota. Let's get to know more about him from Rob Kane, host of Locked On Golden Gophers.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome into another episode of Locked On Giants, your daily podcast covering the New York Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube your first watch of the day. Don't forget, you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I am your host, Patricia Traina, at Patricia_Traina, Traina on Twitter, your New York Giants expert and credentialed member of the media, site publisher and senior writer for Giants Country, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New York Giants. And I'm also the author of The Big 50, The Men and Moments That Made the New York Giants, available from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever you find books. And today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Okay, on today's episode of Locked On Giants, we are speaking with Rob Kane, aka Kane, host of Locked On Gophers. And Rob is going to give us his firsthand scouting reports of Giants' second-round draft pick, John Michael Schmitz, the center of the future, the guy that I've been calling for leading up to the draft. Kane, welcome to the Locked On Giants podcast. So glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk a little bit about John Michael Schmitz. I know you not only were calling for him to go there, but I also was hoping he would head to the Giants. So we both got what we wanted there.
Absolutely. And the great thing about the Giants selection of John Michael Schmitz is that they didn't have to trade up to get him, which I thought maybe might be the case. And I also thought he would be the first center off the board as well. And as it turns out, he was the second center off the board, and the Giants were able to sit tight. So that was very much a relief to me.
I was absolutely with you. I was just kind of shocked that he fell as far as he did, but it turned out to the right spot. So in the end, it all worked out.
For sure. Kane, let's jump in right now and talk about John Michael Schmitz, his game, the type of blocking scheme he came from. You know, NFL scouting reports had him as the most NFL ready, the most complete center in this draft class. What can you tell us about his overall game?
John Michael Schmitz he plays super physical, and he's very quick as well. Maybe not in the sense of like speed and flat out speed, but very quick to get off the blocks. His first step is very quick. And so I think that's going to help a lot for the Giants and help with him translating to the NFL level right away. I agree that he's probably the most pro-ready center. I think the only reason we kind of started to see that dip was because maybe he's not putting up as many bench press numbers at the combine, or he's not having as quick of a 40, which when it comes to offensive linemen, I don't think that is as pertinent, but he didn't test athletically like Tippmann, who ended up being the first true center that went to the Jets. So I think that's kind of where that came into play. But overall, he's run the zone concepts a lot here in Minnesota. I think he'll also be very quick to understand the power concepts that the Giants run as well. He's very knowledgeable when it comes to on and off the field. So not only will he pick everything up really quickly as he did here in Minnesota, but I think the biggest thing you're going to find is he's very vocal both on the field and in the locker room. I don't think it's going to take him much time to, at least let his presence be known that I want to help. I want to contribute however I can. And he is very good at IDing things on the field and calling out the different concepts and adjustments on the field as well.
You mentioned the athleticism of John Michael Schmitz. I'm assuming he has enough athleticism, obviously, to function at the NFL level in regards to moving around. But at Minnesota, was he used much in that capacity? Was he asked to pull a lot or do traps or do anything on the move? And how was he at getting to the second level?
He was used in some pulling concepts. He was great in the screen game as well. He's very good at having the patience and then kicking out. So I think overall, he's going to translate very well. He does have athleticism. I think it's just getting to that when you're looking at RAS scores. I think he ended up testing out in about the 6 or 7 range, whereas I think Tippmann came in as like at 8.6 or something like that. And it's just like the extra little bit. I think that's what maybe pushed him ahead of John Michael Schmitz, but definitely has athleticism, has the drive, and has that field knowledge that I think will give him the full package for the Giants.
How was his balance and his hand punch?
His hand placement is fantastic, and he's really good at leverage as well. He kind of has a natural instinct for that. Now, overall, he has a ton of hip flexibility, which will definitely help him at that center position, but also showed a lot of core power, especially you saw that in the Senior Bowl as well. I don't know, but in a lot of the one-on-ones, he was able to hold his ground even after some of the top defensive linemen in one-on-ones he was taking on there. Overall, I think those traits will help him be successful, but great hip flexibility, great hand placement, and using his leverage overall. So it should be a lot of positive things for the Giants. I think overall, the only thing that maybe would be seen as a negative is that if he can't match up with the best of the best when it comes to maybe an interior presence like a Aaron Donald, if he can get bullied in that space. Now, I don't think he would, but at the same time, every center in the league is going to have some troubles with a guy like Aaron Donald. So not too much to worry about there.
Another knock against Schmitz, and quite honestly, there's nothing he can really do about it because it is what it is that he has shorter than usual or shorter than preferred arm length, which I suppose could be a problem with swallowing up bigger blockers and whatnot. I'm just kind of curious, have you seen that to be an issue? And if it has been an issue, how is he compensated for that?
I think it's just having that football IQ and knowing when it comes to timing for those type of things, I think, because overall he hasn't really had any problems with getting beat or getting absolutely bulldozed on the line. He really holds his own, and I haven't really seen any problems in that department. Now, when they're going through this combine process, they're always going to try to look for a nitpicking things. And I think that's one of those things. Like you think back to Kenny Pickett in his hands, John Michael Schmitz, and maybe just a little bit shorter of arms, but overall he's managed to do it through 4+ years starting with the Gophers and being one of the best centers against some top defenses like your Iowas, like your Michigans, where you're going to see these NFL talents on a consistent basis, playing against Maisie Smith of Michigan and whatnot. So I think overall he's going to hold over just fine, and I wouldn't be too worried about that one.
How is he with combo blocks?
Overall, he's great at combination blocks with the guards, and he's really good at erasing the defensive tackles. Now, again, I think that's going to be harder to do with maybe your superstars at that level. But I think when it comes to your typical guys you're going to see on that defensive line, maybe your average players to maybe up and coming players, he's going to have no problems there. I think it just comes to the athletic freaks where you might run into some issues, but overall communication has been no problem in that department. I think he's really good in that facet.
And what about getting out to the second level? Is he quick enough to get out to the second level to make the initial contact?
Absolutely. He's had no problem getting out to the second level, even from when he very first early was starting. I think from 2019 and on, we've seen him consistently get there. And so that's kind of been a strength of his, is getting to that second level consistently.
Folks, you are tuned into the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and my guest today is Locked On Gophers host, Rob Kane. We are talking about John Michael Schmitz, the Giants' second-round draft pick. And this episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't know why we react the way we do or what we want until we talk things through. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, please give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if at any time your assigned therapist isn't quite working for you, you can switch at no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. And Rob, we have been talking about the strengths that John Michael Schmitz brings to the game, but to your knowledge, to your recollection, is there anything else as far as a weakness, no matter how minute it might be or whatnot, that you think might be something he would want to address in the coming weeks and months in order to really attain the success at the next level?
That's a good question. I think overall, nothing really jumps out to me. I think it's just getting up to the level of the speed quick enough, especially if he wants to be an immediate starter. I think overall he works super hard. He brings a lot of consistency and details to his work. So I think that's going to play in his favor. Over the course of 932 snaps with the Gophers, he only gave up 20 total pressures and 2 total sacks. And those 2 total sacks came this senior year. So I think it's just maybe always staying on the gas. I think one of those sacks also was kind of a fluky thing where somebody got off the edge into the backfield, and as he was coming back to pick them up, the quarterback scrambled towards that defender and ended up being credited with the sack there. So overall, he's really consistent. I don't see too many pressures. I think it's just getting up to the speed of play immediately. Hopefully he can catch up quicker so he's ready to go in a week 1 as opposed to really clicking in week 4 or 5-ish.
We know about his dead ball snap in the shotgun. We also know about, snapping direct to the quarterback. Just out of curiosity, can he also long snap?
I don't think we saw him do too much long snapping overall here with the Gophers. We had someone kind of specified for that role, but he didn't have problems with placement when it came to working out of the shotgun or anything like that. But I didn't think we saw too many long snapping opportunities for him. And one thing I guess is that he really hasn't had too many quarterbacks that he's had to work with. He had Tanner Morgan for almost in his entire career, and then Ethan Kaliak-Manis, but it didn't seem like that transition when Ethan was thrown and thrust into that starting position. It seemed like it was pretty flawless right away. So that was nice to see the quick adjustment there too.
What about off the field? I mean, my initial impression of him, laid back, very businesslike, not somebody who's going to get rattled or freaked out by the bright lights of the New York market. I mean, how did you find him to be off the field?
I think overall in the pressers, he's very well spoken. I think you can feel the leadership, but like when it comes to maybe in the locker room and things like that, he seems like he's kind of a more like goofy guy, more subtle jokes and whatnot, but it's not anything. I feel like some offensive linemen, they can go to the spectrum of really odd and sometimes just really goofy. I wouldn't say that. I think he's more put together and more cleaned up, very subtle. I think that was a good word that you used there, but overall, he's a great leader and very vocal once he gets into his groove and once he gets into that locker room. I remember hearing about how much he stepped up vocally and picking up other guys in certain situations, even from 2019 when he was younger and more of one of the younger pieces in that core line of Daniel Faalele and Blaze Andrews and guys like that too. So I think overall you're getting a guy who understands his role, but can be a vocal leader when needed.
When we talk about offensive linemen, it's been said by offensive linemen themselves that I've spoken to over the years, at any rate, that in order to play on the line, you have to have a little bit of a screw loose. And, I think back to the centers that the Giants have had over the years, and they haven't had a consistent starting center on opening day. I think you'd have to go back to Weston Richburg, which I want to say was around 2016, maybe 2017. But anyway, the guys that they've had since have been Bulldogs. And I'm not talking Georgia Bulldogs, by the way, but guys who are enforcers, who aren't afraid to do a little extra pushing and shoving, so long as they don't get caught by the officials with the little yellow flags at the ready. If I remember correctly, John Michael Schmitz didn't have a whole lot of penalties in college, but certainly I think it's probably fair to say that he also wasn't the type to kind of just shy away from the opportunity to give a little extra push or shove if the opportunity presented itself. I mean, do you agree with that?
Not a lot of penalties, but if you test his quarterback, if anything seems anywhat chippy or anything like that, he's the first guy in that pile as far as backing up his quarterback and making his presence felt. So I don't think you have to worry on that front. I think overall he's a grinder and he always wants to be the best. He wants to be the greatest on that offensive line. He wants to be able to identify every single thing ahead of time and really cut any sort of chaos that a defense tries to create, nip it in the bud. So I think you're getting that type of worker from him, but you won't have to worry too much when it comes to the penalties or simple errors.
And John Michael Schmitz, of course, also had a wrestling background. Now, I don't know if he wrestled just in high school or also in college as well, but can you speak about how you saw that wrestling background maybe help him with his offensive line play?
He did have a wrestling background. I don't believe he did any wrestling in college, but that being said, I think overall wrestling helps a ton for offensive linemen in general, but I think that's where it came into that strengths of his hip flexibility and core power and being able to control and wiggle his body and able to gain in order to gain that leverage and to kind of wash out the worries of having shorter arms or anything like that. I think having that overall flexibility and being able to fluidly shift his hips has helped him immensely at that center position.
John Michael Schmitz sounds like a guy who doesn't have very many warts, if any warts, to his game. Certainly nothing to be overly concerned with. But that said, rookies are very rarely a finished product, no matter how NFL ready the scouts claim they are or their coaches claim they are or whatnot. Looking ahead to these next several weeks and months as John Michael Schmitz integrates himself into the Giants offense, if there is one thing, no matter how big or small it might be, that he absolutely positively has got to clean up in his game in order to make sure that he can be that successful center at the next level, what would you say it is?
I think overall, like I said a little earlier, I think it's just getting up to speed. I think overall you might see some simple things right away, but one thing that was kind of prominent in the pro day as well is that the Giants sent their offensive line coach to run our drills. And it seemed like everything, whether it was ran right away perfectly smoothly, no, it wasn't. There were some adjustments made. But anytime there was an adjustment asked for in that pro day, you saw him go right back to the front of that line and hit it immediately. And kind of the second time round, you didn't have to ask him again. So I think the biggest thing for him is that to continue to absorb that and learn quickly and take it into account for the next day and the next day. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but that'll probably be the first steps for him to be able to get towards that starter level quicker.
In addition to reporting on, the football progress that John Michael Schmitz is going to be making over the next several weeks and months, I always like to get to know the guy, on a personal level in terms of, an angle, a feature story angle that maybe might be of interest to the listeners and or my readers. Give me a tip here, Kane. What's something that maybe a lot of people outside of the Minnesota Golden Gophers community don't know about John Michael Schmitz that you think might make for an interesting read or even an interview on a future Locked On Giants podcast?
I was trying to think of one too before I got on the show, because I was like, man, I feel like I've covered the Gophers for about 2 years now, actually on the media, but overall, I keep getting washed out by some of the other stories that have come through with this senior class that has been huge for us, like a Tanner Morgan, like a Mo Ibrahim. But I think one thing that was fun heading into this last year was that Coach Fleck really relied on Mo, Tanner, and John Michael Schmitz, along with Chris Ottman-Bell, and called them, I believe, the core four. And they were kind of like the structure of what the program was. They had built it basically from the time that Fleck got here. Those were some of his first recruits, and they made it through those 6 years. They used the extra COVID year and really helped make this culture, this program, this foundation of row the boat mantra what it is. I think you can have a coach that's preaching it, but I think those four especially were kind of what built that foundation and that development over the course of the Gophers' time here. And then also John Michael Schmitz, I believe, was engaged over the part of this offseason or this last season and got married recently. So that was a fun storyline to cover as well. Those were kind of the two fun things overall. And then again, he was committed to Fleck with Western Michigan and ended up following him to Minnesota. So that was a fun storyline as well.
Okay, interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, I think John Michael Schmitz is one of the older NFL rookies, right? Isn't he around 24 years old, or maybe he's at 24 years old at this point?
Around there, I believe. Yeah, he's definitely one of the older rookies, but I think overall, I wouldn't be too worried about that just because the center position can be played at an elite level for so long. So you're still getting him for a healthy, 10 years maybe?
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I know he stayed an extra year, taking advantage of the COVID clause, which granted an extra year to college athletes. Do you think that helped him staying in an extra year, or do you think maybe he could have come out last year and still, had the praise and the promise that he seems to have this year, having stayed in that extra season in college football?
I think there was some talk last year that he was interested in coming out, but I think having gotten the scouting feedback and whatnot, he didn't see the opportunity to be potentially day one or an early day two guy. So that's kind of what helped drive him back, was to kind of increase that capital and also finish some unsettled business with the Gophers and trying to get them to that Big Ten West title. Now, we fell short of that goal, unfortunately, but overall, I think that extra year definitely helped. He put his name right in the conversation with that the best center in the nation award. And so I think overall, I probably would have gave it to him, but it ended up going to Michigan center. But I think overall it helped him because it helped him play even more high caliber NFL level defensive linemen. He saw Lucas Van Ness this year. He saw Macy Smith this year, along with others over the past few years. But I feel like the biggest thing that stood out on my end is that he did that, and he did it at an elite level while having 4 new starting offensive linemen around him. He's the only returning offensive lineman of our unit last year, and it came together right away from week 1. It looked like there were some mistakes here and there, especially on the new tackles outside, but the communication level, I feel like if you saw the amount of communication and the amount of things he was able to help these guys gel that unit, I think that's going to translate immensely being a rookie in the NFL and having that understanding of how to communicate with different people right away from the jump.
And then finally, Kane, I've got to ask you this. The New York media market is one of the most difficult ones for a young player to adapt to play in, given the scrutiny, the bright lights, what have you. It takes a certain type of personality to really thrive in this market. Do you think that John Michael Schmitz has that personality to where he should be able to handle, the ups and the downs that come with playing in this market?
I think no matter what, you're not going to get a guy who maybe barks back or whatnot, but he'll maybe underline some of those criticisms, and he'll always get after it. I don't think he's ever going to settle. And I think that's something we saw with the Gophers. So I definitely think he'll be able to handle it. And he grew up in the Chicago area and whatnot too. So he's been in that bigger city feel before as he was coming up through his high school prospecting, came out to Minnesota, has played in the Big Ten, has definitely heard a lot of things when it comes to national news lines, and heading into last year, I believe Mel Kiper even had him as his best center heading into the draft. So I think he's saw those expectations, and I was very impressed with how he handled them, and basically, in my eyes, superseded a lot of them as well. So I think he'll be able to handle it, but it'll be a fun storyline to watch.
All right, Kane, really appreciate all the insight on John Michael Schmitz. I know you and I were talking about this a little bit offline before we started recording, and I mentioned how I had been beating the drum for a pure center, and Giants general manager Joe Schoen finally listened to me. I don't know. I mean, okay, I'm giving myself a little too much credit here, but I had been pleading for a center, and he finally got the team a guy who could be the center for the next several years. And I also mentioned to you how, given how long I've kind of been following this team, John Michael Schmitz reminds me a lot of Bart Oates, not just in terms of, physical features, the same face and, kind of how he carries himself, but just a style of play from what I know of, his days with Minnesota. And I'll tell you what, if he becomes half as successful as Bart Oates was back in the day, Bart Oates playing for the Giants going back to, I think it was 85 through, I want to say 90 or 91, the Giants will have gotten themselves a good one. So I am really, really excited about John Michael Schmitz fitting into that offensive line and taking control of that offensive line as the center and conductor, the guy in charge of making all the line calls.
Yep. Yeah, I hope he absolutely lives up to the expectations and even more for you. I'm excited for him. And I told my followers over at Locked On Golden Gophers, this might be the first offensive lineman jersey I make sure to buy out there when I have the chance.
All right. Well, that is absolutely awesome. And I'd wait though, because, in the NFL with jersey numbers, rookies get assigned temporary numbers. And then once the regular season starts, they switch. So if you're planning on buying it, that John Michael Schmitz jersey, number 61, I would wait to see if maybe he can finagle a deal to get his college number 60, if of course, he wants that number. So anyway, Kane, again, thank you for coming on the Locked On Giants podcast. He is Rob Kane. You can find him over at Locked On Golden Gophers for all things University of Minnesota Golden Gophers. Giant fans, stay tuned. We have more of your questions coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I am your host, Patricia Trainum. All this week, we are talking to our Locked On college hosts about the Giants draft class. And I got a chance to speak to everybody with the exception of somebody from Old Dominion, because we don't have an Old Dominion host, but I did cover Trey Hawkins with Damian Parson, who was on the show with me on Monday, if you want to go back and check out that interview. But otherwise, we've got all the rest of the hosts coming up to talk about the Giants draft picks, what they bring to the table, who they are as people, all stuff that hopefully you will find very interesting. And also, folks, don't forget, this NFL schedule is coming out on Thursday. And I am going to have to do a schedule show. So I will interrupt the draft coverage a little bit, or the post-draft coverage, I should say. So just to do a show on the schedule, but never fear. We're going to go through the entire series, and then we're going to keep on rolling as we bring you up to the OTAs, which are starting in a couple weeks. So that should be fun. There'll be plenty of stuff to talk about. All right. On this segment, we're going to take some of your questions. All right. We're going to kick it off first with Jarek L., who's all the way from Dallas, Cowboys country. God bless you, Jarek, surviving in Dallas country as a Giant fan. So Jarek writes, we know Dable cut down on Daniel Jones's turnovers and smarter decision-making, but given you're closer in the building, what are a couple things in your opinion that makes Brian Dable's teaching so effective to maximize players' abilities? All right, easy one. Thank you for that question, Jarek. The thing about Dable is he's not a guy who's going to get on somebody for making a mistake. I mean, I think the worst thing you can do if you're a teacher or a coach or whatever, a mentor, is to constantly bash a person if they make a mistake. And that is something we kind of saw a little bit with the previous coaching regime. It's like Daniel Jones almost became shell-shocked because it was like, oh my God, I can't make a mistake. I can't go out there and make a mistake. If I make a mistake, I'm going to get, I'm going to hear it. Mistakes, don't get me wrong. You don't want your players making mistakes at all if you can help it. But if they're going to make a mistake, practice is the place to do it. That's why you practice, so that you can fine tune your game and get it, so that when you get to when it really counts, you get those mistakes and those yips that you might have out of your game. So I would say that's probably the biggest factor with Dable. It's like, let's go out. Let's try things. Let's see what you can do and what you can't do. And if you make a mistake, not the end of the world, because it's practice. If you continue to make a mistake, then we know that particular throw or that particular play isn't in your wheelhouse. So we'll have to go with something else. So that would be my answer to you regarding that question. So thank you. Jarek, for sending that question in. And thank you for being a listener to the Locked On Giants podcast. Really appreciate that. All right. We have one more. This is from Wayman S. And he writes, is there a reason why literally every podcast is dancing around Leonard Williams? Whenever salary comes up, the focus gets put everywhere but him. Why would it be a bad thing to trade him for a future draft pick and sign a cheaper replacement and then go after a higher level replacement next offseason? What's the problem? Wayman, who's going to trade for that contract knowing that he's got an $18 million cap hit? Knowing that he's coming off of an injury season where he actually missed time, knowing that he's getting up to that golden age of 30. Trades are not that easy to execute, Wayman. I don't see the Giants trading him. And then above all, who are you going to replace him with? All right. You say, well, trade for a future draft pick and replace him down the line. What are you going to do about this year? Who's going to replace him this year? So, Wayman, that's not the answer. That is not the answer, I don't think. I mean, the answer, quite honestly, and I've spoken about this before, I know I've written about it before. You go to Leonard Williams and you see if he's interested in doing a short contract extension to lower that $32 million overall cap hit. And if he is, then great, you can get money. If he's not, there are other ways they can get money. And I've spoken about that before on the show. I know I've talked about, the money that would open up once Dexter Lawrence signed his contract. We're still waiting as of this recording to find out exactly how much opened up, but that's one way. They can obviously see if they can get something done with Saquon to get him off that $10.1 million cap hit from the franchise tag. They could probably extend Tyrod Taylor as the backup quarterback, lower his $5.9 million base salary. I question if Darnay Holmes, who has a $3 million or nearly $3 million cap hit, if he's going to be on the roster. So there are other ways they can get money if they need to, if Leonard Williams is not open to an extension. So that's probably why you don't hear me talk about it a lot, because in addition to having discussed it, there are other ways they can work around it. You've got to have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C when it comes to this stuff, because you never know. But to your point about trading him, don't be so quick to want to trade people away before the season starts, especially when you don't have a replacement on the roster, number one. And number two, you just don't know how the season's gonna pan out. I mean, the Giants struggled last year when Leonard Williams wasn't on the field. And I know they added Ashawn Robinson. They added Raheem Nunez-Roches, but those guys are run stuffers. They're not every down players like a Leonard Williams, who can also rush the passer. So you trade him and you really create a hole on your roster that you really don't need to be creating right now. So hope that answers your question. Thank you so much for asking questions. And Giant fans, remember, if you want to ask me a question, you can do so by tweeting it to me. My Twitter account is at Patricia_Traina, Traina. You can tweet it to me with the hashtag, by the way, AskPTrain. This way it'll show up in the little column that I have set up specifically to take listener questions. You can also email me the question. The email address is lockedongiantspodcast@gmail.com. That you can find in the show notes. If you want to send it to me via Instagram, my Instagram account is at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. We'll be talking about Giants' third-round pick, Jalin Hyatt, wide receiver. And my special guest to talk about Jalin Hyatt is the host of Locked On Vols, Eric Kane. So don't miss that show. We will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.